What will you do if you lose access to that private instance or lose the PEM file? What is a provider and how it's used in Terraform? How do you import the resources that have been manually created into Terraform management?
Yes, I have used Prometheus Stack.
As you see, Docker is pretty capable of doing everything. So why do we need Kubernetes when we already have the Docker? Today, can you differentiate run and CMD, monolithic and microservices architecture?
Namaste, this is Vijay Painam. Welcome to the channel. I have never thought I would be saying these welcome words by starting off a YouTube channel, but I have just said it. And without any further ado, let's start off. In this first video, we will be doing a mock interview where we'll be going through the most asked interview questions in the DevOps. We have our host Prabhu with us, who would be asking us all the questions, and I would be answering all of those questions. So let's see.
Yeah, hi Vijay. Good morning. So this will be your first round of DevOps technical interview. So let's go ahead. Why don't you start with a brief introduction of yourself?
Hi Venkatesh. Sure, thank you. As you already know, right, I am Vijay. I have a total of 4.5 years of experience as a build and release engineer and as a DevOps engineer as well. So coming to the tech stack, I have been majorly working on AWS and GCP as the cloud environments. In these cloud environments, I have been majorly working on multiple services like EC2 instances, VPCs, auto-scaling groups, load balancers, public-private subnets, Route 53, S3 buckets, EKS cluster. Coming to the major DevOps tools and technologies, right, I have been majorly working on Jenkins as a CICD pipeline. I have been working on Ansible for the configuration management. I have been working with Terraform as an infrastructure as a code tool. I have also worked on multiple Docker files. I have written multiple Docker files, and we are hosting these Docker containers inside the Kubernetes cluster. Along with these things, right, I have been also working on Prometheus Stack for the service monitoring and DLK Stack for the log monitoring as well. I have been working with the Linux machines for the past 4.5 years, so I'm good at shell scripting and Python scripting too. So this is about me.
Okay, can you tell me what is a VPC and how it's used in DevOps?
Yes, a VPC is a virtual private cloud by using which we will be able to isolate our resources over a public cloud environment. And by using this VPC, I will be able to configure the CIDR range for our particular VPC. And I would be able to configure the number of subnets that I need to have, and I would be able to configure these according to the suits for our organization.
Can you tell me what is a public-private subnet and what are the differences between those two?
By using a public subnet, I would be able to host the resources which would be able to directly accessible from the public internet. And by using a private subnet, I would be able to host the instances which doesn't need to be accessed by the public internet directly. And these would be typically the backend application server code or else the databases. And the private subnet instances would be able to download packages from the public internet directly by using the NAT gateway.
How do you log into your private subnet instance?
Yes, I would be using a Bastion host in order to log into these private subnet instances, and this Bastion host would be residing inside the public subnet. And we would be typically logging into the Bastion host by using the SSH, and from the Bastion host, I would be logging into these private subnet instances by using the private IP.
And what will you do if you lose access to that private instance or lose the PEM file?
For suppose, let's say, if I lost the access to an EC2 instance, right, because of the PEM file, I would be unmounting that particular volume from that particular EC2 instance. By stopping that instance, I would be attaching this particular volume to another EC2 instance, and I would be logging into that particular EC2 instance which I have the access to. I will go to this particular directory and I would be modifying the authorized keys, and I would be modifying the .ssh/authorized keys inside which I need to have the access to, and I would be unmounting this particular volume from the instance, and I would be attaching it to the older instance, and I would be able to log in by the new PEM file.
Okay, since we are on the EC2 instance topic, please tell me some of the Linux commands you have used in your career or in your work experience.
Yes, there are multiple commands which I would be using in day-to-day activities. netstat-lntp in order to list the listening ports. I would be using du-sh* in order to check the usage. I would be using lsblk in order to list all the block devices. I would be using ping in order to test the connectivity. I would be using telnet again in order to check the connectivity of a particular service in another IP address, I would be using htop top free-m in order to check the resources of the EC2 instance. I would be using ps-ef in order to list all the running processes, and I would be using a pipe symbol and grepping it if I want to search for a particular process as well.
Have you worked on Jenkins? Can you tell me how you have worked on Jenkins and what is Jenkins?
Yep, Jenkins is a CI/CD tool by using which I will be able to manage the entire continuous integration and continuous deployment from the creation of a pull request to the deployment, continuously delivering our newly created images to the dev or QA images. And we would be using multiple plugins in order to achieve this, like Git SCM plugin, Maven plugin, Sonar Cube plugin in order to do the Sonar scans, and we would be using a Kubernetes plugin.
And what kind of pipelines you have written in Jenkins?
I have worked on multiple pipelines like declarative pipelines, scripted pipelines, and hybrid pipelines, which is a mixture of declarative and scripted pipelines.
Explain the declarative pipeline syntax used in Jenkins.
Yes, the declarative pipeline would be following a particular syntax where these pipelines would be starting off with pipeline, inside which I would be having stages, inside which I would be having stage, and inside the stage I would be having steps. I would be having multiple stage inside the stages such that I would be able to configure these, and I would be able to write the parallel as well in order to parallelly execute multiple stages at a single time.
Explain the master slave architecture.
By using a master slave architecture, right, I would be able to reduce the load on the master by configuring multiple slaves and running these Jenkins jobs on those slaves attached to it. In order to connect a Linux agent as a slave to the Jenkins, right, we need to go to the nodes, add a new node. I need to pass the IP of the slave which I need to attach as a slave. I need to add the PEM file of that particular slave. I need to pass the user directory, and I need to also select the type of checks that Jenkins needs to be providing while connecting to this particular slave as well. And if I want to connect a Windows agent, right, I need to download the JNLP jar onto the Windows Jenkins, and I should be running the JNLP jar such that the Jenkins would be connecting as a slave to the Jenkins master.
Explain the CI/CD pipelines.
Yep, we would be having multiple stages in our CI/CD pipelines, and these would be triggered via a webhook which we have configured. So whenever a developer creates a pull request, right, this would be triggering the Jenkins pipeline via the webhook, where we would be having multiple stages. The first stage is a checkout stage where we would be checking out all of the latest code, and then we would be building the artifacts in the second stage, and then we would be doing the sonar scans in order to figure out vulnerabilities, code smells, code bugs in the particular project. And in the fourth stage, we would be building the Docker file. And in the fifth stage, we would be using Trivy scans in order to figure out any vulnerabilities inside the Docker container as well. In the sixth stage, we would be pushing this particular image to the container registry, and from there we would be upgrading our dev or QA servers with the latest image. And then we would be running our QA automation test cases on top of the newly released build and sending the results as a post-build actions to the developer as well as QA team. And we had used multiple plugins inside these pipelines in order to store the Jenkins credentials, right? We had used Jenkins credentials plugin, and by using the credentials ID inside these stages, we were able to check out those repositories as well. And the same way, I have also used credentials ID in order to authenticate with the Docker and push all the images to the container repository as well.
You have mentioned in your introduction that you have worked on Ansible, right? So let's go ahead and discuss that tool. What is Ansible and how it works?
Yes, Ansible is a configuration management tool by using which I would be able to manage the configuration across multiple instances by using SSH communication.
What are the different modules you have used in Ansible?
Yes, I have used multiple modules inside Ansible like M module, service module, copy module, shell module. These are the few modules which I had used. By using Ansible roles, I would be able to organize my playbooks into reusable tasks, and this is useful for the code management and using these roles across multiple playbooks as well.
What are handlers and how are handlers used in Ansible?
Yes, handlers are Ansible tasks which would be only triggered when triggered by a notify directive. And these we would be using majorly in order to restart any services. Even though if we trigger the handlers by using the notify directive multiple times, these handlers would be executed only once at the end of the playbook execution.
Let's go to Terraform. Can you tell me what is Terraform and how it's used?
Yep, Terraform is an infrastructure as a code tool by using which I would be able to create multiple resources across multiple cloud providers by writing all the resources as a code.
What is a provider and how it's used in Terraform?
Yep, providers are the plugins which would be talking to the respective backend APIs, right? And these would be in turn used in creating those respective resources inside those respective providers.
How do we import the resources that have been manually created into Terraform management?
Yep, for importing the resources which are created manually to Terraform management, right? We should be creating those respective Terraform files, and then we would be able to import by using Terraform import resource ID command.
Can you explain some of the Terraform commands?
Yep, some of the Terraform commands which I have used are Terraform minute in order to initialize the Terraform plan in order to plan what are the resources that it is going to create, Terraform apply in order to create whatever the resources that we have planned, Terraform import in order to import the resources, Terraform destroy in order to destroy the resources that have been created or in the state file. I would be using Terraform FMT in order to format the Terraform files. I would be using Terraform validate in order to validate my Terraform files.
Can you explain the difference between monolithic and microservices architecture?
Yes, in the monolithic architecture, right, the entire application is entirely designed as a tightly coupled unit. And for suppose, let's say, even if you want to make any modifications to a particular service, right, you should be deploying the entire application. And even if you want to scale any of these services, you should be scaling the entire application as its whole. And in the form of microservices, right, we would be able to segregate this particular monolithic application into multiple individual microservices which are responsible for handling their own application code. And in the microservices, right, we would be able to manage the scaling of the services efficiently. Why? Because we would be able to upscale and downscale a single service upon the usage of that particular service. And we will be using Docker in order to containerize these microservices.
Let's move ahead to the Docker. What is a Docker file?
Yes, we will be having multiple instructions inside a Docker file. From is the first line, which would be defining the base image and the version of the particular Docker file. And we would be having multiple build time commands like run, which would be installing the packages inside the Docker container, copy, which would be copying the files from the local to the Docker image, add, which would be again copying the files or else download the files from the public repository, as well as entering any tarballs as well. I would be using expose, which would be exposing the port. I would be also having the commands like CMD and entry point, which are runtime commands, which would be actually starting off a service.
Can you tell me the difference between copy and add?
Yes, as I said, right, copy and add are build time commands, where copy would be able to just copy the files from local to the remote, and add would be able to download the files as well as enter the tarballs as well.
In the same, can you differentiate run and CMD?
Yep, run is a build time command which would be installing packages in the Docker container, and CMD is a runtime command which would be actually starting off the service inside the Docker container when we execute the Docker run.
Okay, that's good. And how about the difference between CMD and entry point?
Yep, CMD and entry point are both are the Docker runtime commands which would be actually starting off the service. And the CMD, we would be able to override the parameters which we have passed, and inside the entry point, right, we won't be able to override the values. And even though if you mention multiple entry points, right, only the last entry point will be executed.
Can you tell me some other Docker commands that you have used in your work experience?
Yep, the different Docker commands which I have used are Docker PS, Docker PS-A, Docker logs, Docker exec, Docker pull, Docker push, Docker run.
As you see, Docker is pretty capable of doing everything. So why do we need Kubernetes when we already have the Docker? Can you please explain?
Yep, Docker is a containerization tool by using which I would be able to containerize all the dependencies and the artifacts, right? Whereas Kubernetes is an orchestration tool by using which I would be able to better scale, manage the Docker containers which I have deployed.
What are the different services that are available in Kubernetes?
Yes, there are multiple services in Kubernetes. Load balancer, cluster IP, node port. By using the load balancer, I would be able to expose my service to the outside world. By using the cluster IP, I would be able to create a cluster IP which is accessible inside a cluster. And by using the node port, I would be able to open a particular port to the Kubernetes cluster.
Okay, moving ahead, can you explain what is node affinity in Kubernetes?
Yes, we would be using node affinity if you want to deploy some deployments in some of the worker nodes only.
And can you tell me the difference between replica set and stateful set, like where they are used?
Yes, by using a replica set, I would be able to run one replica of a Docker container in all of the worker nodes which I have. And by using the stateful sets, I would be able to persist the data across the Docker lifecycle or else the container lifecycle. And by using the replica sets, I would be able to manage the number of replicas that needs to be running for a particular deployment.
And how do you pass secrets to the deployment?
Yes, in order to pass these secrets to the deployments, right? First of all, I would be creating those secrets by using kubectl create secret. If these secrets needs to be created from literals, I would be passing hyphen hyphen literal. And if these secrets needs to be created from a file, right? I would be creating hyphen hyphen from a file. And I would be mounting these as volumes inside my deployments.
Can you tell me the difference between HPA and VPA?
Yes, by using HPA or VPA, I would be able to auto scale my containers. If I am using HPA, right, it is a horizontal pod autoscaler where I would be adding multiple number of replicas of the same deployment to the service, such that it would be balancing the load and accessing it in the actual application as well. By using a vertical pod autoscaler, I would be adding more resources to the same deployment which I was running. If I am using the VPA, right, I need to have a downtime in order to add more resources to the same deployment which I was running.
Okay, and how about cluster autoscaler in Kubernetes? Can you please explain?
Yep. The cluster autoscaler. So when the HPA kicks in and scheduling multiple pods, right, in order to cater for the workload, the resources in the Kubernetes cluster would be exhausted. So in order to create these resources on the fly or else the worker nodes on the fly, we would be using a cluster autoscaler. So based on the resource usage in the worker nodes, we would be able to add more number of worker nodes by using a cluster autoscaler.
Coming to the monitoring part, what are the different tools you have used for monitoring?
Yes, I have used Prometheus Stack in order to monitor the services, and I have used ELK Stack in order to monitor the logs and gather all the logs from the respective containers or else the respective services to a log aggregation such as Elasticsearch. And by using Kibana, we are creating multiple dashboards and sending the alerts based on the logs which we are getting by using watchers as well.
Okay. Prometheus Stack. Okay. What are the different tools that are there in Prometheus Stack?
Yes, inside the Prometheus stack, I would be having a Prometheus, Grafana, Alertmanager, and multiple exporters like JMX exporter, Node exporter. I would be using JMX exporter in order to monitor the Java services, and I would be using Node exporter in order to monitor the node matrices and all. And we have multiple kinds of other exporters like Elasticsearch exporter, MongoDB exporter, Kafka exporter in order to monitor the databases too. And these exporters would be running inside the host machines and exporting all of the matrices over a particular port. And by mentioning the Prometheus and by mentioning the scrape configs inside the Prometheus.yml, the Prometheus would be able to scrape all of these matrices and would be able to store the data inside the Prometheus time series database. And by using Grafana, I would be able to create multiple dashboards. There are readily available dashboards which I would be able to directly copy by copying the ID of that particular dashboards, or else I would be able to create these dashboards by using PromQL as well. And based on the alert rules which I have configured, I would be sending the alerts from the Alertmanager to different teams which I have configured inside my Alertmanager configuration file.
And can you tell me how you monitor your Kubernetes cluster?
Yes, in order to monitor our Kubernetes, right, we have deployed the Prometheus stack by using the readily available Helm charts. And by using this Prometheus stack, we were able to monitor certain kind of matrices that are responsible in order to run the Kubernetes cluster.
That's it from my side, Vijay. I've asked all the questions I wanted to ask, and thank you.
Yes, thank you for having me. Have a great time. So that's it, guys, from the mock interview perspective. Hope these question and answers would be helping you in your interviews. Thanks for watching.